Why should you use Hypermedia? The trade-off, though, is that a uniform interface degrades efficiency, since information is transferred in a standardized form rather than one in which is specific to the application needs. Absolutely, this is true. The REST interface is designed to be efficient for large-grain hypermedia data transfer, optimized for the common case of the web, but resulting in an interface that is not optimal for other forms of architectural interaction. Roy Fielding. Okay, I can buy this. I mean, in the sense that if you build output specifically for your needs, right? So if you went and you used a full binary format, you did zero allocation architecture, and you went all in on it, you could make something that's extremely performance-based, like just based all around. But it's only for your application. That's like like you can imagine all games, they don't just use JSON and transfer that over UDP to go through players' position updates, right? That'd be crazy. You wouldn't be able to have a game if you're trying to do JSON encoding and decoding. They're going to use something significantly more efficient. But you'd make a trade-off when you do that, right? No matter what you use, you always make a trade-off. Let's see. Hypermedia is often significantly less complex than a SPA approach would be for many problems. Okay, reasonable. I forgot to put this. We are obviously fans of Hypermedia and think that it can address, at least in part, many of the problems that the web development world is facing today. Okay, I agree. Hypermedia allows your application API to be much more aggressively refactored and optimized. Okay. Hypermedia takes the pressure off of adopting a particular server technology, since you do not have extensive JavaScript front-end code base. Okay, yes. With HTMX and the additional UX possibilities that it gives you, we believe that many modern web applications can be built using HTML and the Hypermedia paradigm. So this is HTMX in a nutshell. That's what it's doing. So with that being said, as with all technical choices, there are trade-offs associated with Hypermedia. In this article, I'll give you some ways to think about it if Hypermedia will be a good fit for your application or a feature you are building. This is beautiful, by the way. Notice right here that there's no, this is the way to build this the best. It's just, this is good. I like it. Here are reasons you could like it, but it may not be for you. This is probably a much better way to sell any sort of framework ever, right? Because that's not typically how you're sold on Twitter. Typically how you're sold on Twitter is, if you're not using this, you're falling behind. If you're not doing this, you're doing the wrong thing. Let's find out. Transitional applications and Hypermedia. Before we get into details of when Hypermedia is a good choice, we would like to clarify that adopting Hypermedia is not an either-or decision when building a web application. For most single-page applications, utilize Hypermedia after all, as a bootstrap mechanism to start the application. Absolutely. In his talk, Have SPAs Ruined the Web? Rich Harris gives us the term transitional applications. That is the application that mix both hypermedia and non-hypermedia SPA concepts. Ooh, I kind of want to watch that at some point. That is applications that mix both. Oh, whoopsies. We have responded to Mr. Harris's talk in a more detail here. Ooh, we're going to have to look at that. But suffice to say, we violently agree with him that a pragmatic transitional approach to the web development is the best. You should use the right tool for the particular job you are working on. Okay, so again, I'm on board with this. I'm fully on board with this. Where we would like to disagree with Mr. Harris is where the line is between features that can be implemented effectively in Hypermedia and features that require a more sophisticated client-side approach. We feel that with HTMX, Hypermedia can go much, much further than many web developers today believe is possible. And further that, for many applications, it can address many or all of our UX needs. Okay. Seems a little crazy. Hypermedia is a good fit if your UI is mostly text and images. If the mother of all HTMX demos, David Guilot, how do you say that name? I'm just going to say it, I'm going to just call it Guilot. David Guilot of the Contexte show how to replacing React with HTMX leads to a 67% reduction in total code base, along with numerous other eye-popping results. As a result, we would like to claim that every team moving from React to HTMX would experience these results. The fact is that the Contexte web application is extremely amenable to the Hypermedia style. So I guess I'd have to look at this. Here, let me just pop this thing up really quickly. Is there like an example? Oh, I guess we'd have to watch this one. We'll look at this. Django Con. Django. Django. Yeah, right. All right, anyways. All right, if your UI is cruddy, Another area where Hypermedia has a long track record of success is cruddy web applications in the Ruby on Rails style. If your main application mechanic is showing forms and saving the forms into a database, Hypermedia can work very well. With HTMX, it can be very smooth and not constrained to a simple list view, detailed view approach. Many server applications take. Okay. If your UI is nested, with updates mostly taking place in well-defined blocks. Okay. One area where the Hypermedia can start going a little wobbly is when you have a UI dependency that spans structural areas of the screen. A good example of this, and one that often comes up, is when discussing the Hypermedia approach, is the issue count number shown in the Issues tab in GitHub. Okay. For a long time, when you close an issue on GitHub, the issue count on the tab did not update properly. GitHub, in general, although not exclusive, uses Hypermedia-style application. Ah, exclaims the spa enthusiast. See, even GitHub can't get this right. Well, GitHub fixed the issue, but it does not demonstrate a problem with a Hypermedia approach. How do you update disjoint parts of the UI cleanly? HTMX offers a few techniques for making this work. And Contexte, in their talks, discuss handling the situation very cleanly using this approach. Okay, because this is like a very typical problem, which is that you just have various parts of your UI that when new data gets updated, you could have multiple things updating at once. I feel like I understand this. I get this. Event approach. Typically, we would just use a bunch of JSON, right? You communicate up in JSON, you get back JSON, and we just go dot, 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 dot. Yep. Let us grant that this is an area where Hypermedia approach can get into trouble. To avoid this problem, one potential strategy is to co-locate dependent elements for a given resource within a given region or area of the screen in an application. An example, consider the contact application whose details for a screen for displaying and editing a contact has an area for basic contact information, an area for contacts emails, count, blah, 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 an area for contacts phone number and the count of those phone numbers. The UI could be laid out in the following manner. Okay, that makes sense. Everything looks just fine. In this scenario, each subsection has its own dedicated Hypermedia endpoints. Okay, perfect. The trick here is that the email and phone counts are co-located on the screen with their collection, which allows you to target just that particular area for updating. Okay, I mean, I get what they're trying to say here, which is just you could limit all, like, notice that all these changes are very limited to their region. And so co-locating data to changes or co-locating screen real estate to changes, I mean, I get the idea. I don't know if I want to be constrained that way, but I get the idea, right? I get the idea. Do I like it? I don't know. Right? An area effectively, let's see, each area effectively forms a sort of server-side component, independently of the other areas on the screen. They all are nested within a broader contact detail user interface. Yeah, so this is probably one thing that React Server Components really tries to highlight or do well, is that each one of these allows, you can just take this component and put it somewhere else and it just works. And so how do you do that effectively in HTMX? I don't know yet, but it seems kind of exciting. A side note, UI-driven Hypermedia APIs. Note that our previous Hypermedia API in our endpoints, in this case, is driven by the UI. If we have a particular UI layout that we want to achieve and we adapt our API to that, if the UI changed, we would have no qualms with the complexity changing our API to satisfy the new requirements. This is a unique aspect of developing with Hypermedia, and we discuss more detail here. Okay. Of course, there may be UI requirements that do not allow for grouping of dependent elements in this manner, and if this technique mentioned above aren't satisfactory, then it may be time to consider an alternative approach. Okay, perfect. This is great, right? This is actually a really great argument for when you should and shouldn't use it. If you need deep links and good first rendering performance, a final area where Hypermedia outperforms the other options is when you need deep links. That is, links to your application that go beyond the landing page, or when you need excellent first render performance. Since Hypermedia is natural language of the web, and since browsers are very good at rendering HTML given a URL, this approach is hard to beat for traditional web features such as these. Is this true? Do we have a yes or a no on this one? I can't tell. It's hard to tell. You know what I mean? It's hard to tell if that's a yes or no. Why does it have better performance? Couldn't React render the same thing? Where's the best place to subscribe? If you're not on YouTube, hitting that subscribe button, then go to Twitch and drop that Amazon Prime. For me, Prime. who's on Amazon. But Amazon won't let me legally recognize that I am Amazon Prime, okay? They don't like that because they already have an Amazon Prime. So if I say I'm both, then I might as well just call this a Rust stream and get in trouble with the foundation. Shee! If your UI has many dynamic interdependencies, as we discussed in the above section, nested UIs, one area where Hypermedia can have trouble is when when there are many UI dependencies spread across your UI and you can't afford to update the whole UI. This is what Roy Fielding was getting at in the quote at the top of the article. The web was designed for large-grain Hypermedia data transfers, not for a lot of small data exchanges. Particularly difficult for Hypermedia is to handle when these dependencies are dynamic. That is, they depend on information that cannot be determined at the server-side rendering. A good example of this is something like a spreadsheet. A user can enter an arbitrary function into a cell and introduce all sorts of dependencies on the screen on the fly. Okay. I would, that makes sense. I guess, yeah, it probably makes more sense to have something else, right? However, for many applications, the editable row pattern is an acceptable alternative to a more general spreadsheet-like behavior. And this pattern does play well with Hypermedia by isolating edits within a bounded area. Okay, so in other words, if your application has changes in which cause many disparate components to update, then probably not good. If you require offline functionality, Hypermedia distributed architecture leans heavily on the server side for rendering representations of resources. When a server is down or unreachable, the architecture will obviously have trouble. It is possible to use service workers to handle offline requests, although this is a complex option. Agreed completely. And it is easy to detect when Hypermedia application is offline and show the offline message. And many thick client applications do as well. Absolutely. I mean, if you're offline and you try to go on Twitter, it's not like you're going to have a great experience all of a sudden. Just because they don't use HTMX, right? It doesn't make any sense with that. But if your application requires full functionality in offline environment, then Hypermedia approach is not going to be an acceptable one. Okay. If your UI state is updated extremely frequently. Another situation where Hypermedia is not going to be a good approach is if your UI state is updated frequently. A good example is an online game that needs to capture mouse movements. Putting a Hypermedia network request in between a mouse move and a UI update will not work well, and you would be far better off writing your own client-side state management for this game and syncing with the server using a different technology. Absolutely. So this makes sense, but I mean, this is, in some sense, Stadia. Stadia did this. So one could argue you could use this approach if you want Stadia-like performance. Which, is that good? Is that bad? Probably not what you're wanting. If you're writing a purely server-side rendered game, that's a lot of effort. And so I think if you're using HTML and JavaScript and you're writing a server-side game, you're probably doing the wrong thing. Can we all argue you're probably using the wrong language at this point? Of course, your game may also have a settings page, and that settings page might be better done with Hypermedia than whatever solution you use at the core of your game. There's nothing wrong with mixing approaches. It's a transitional style. Yeah, HTMX does have WebSocket support. I'm curious about that. I'll investigate that maybe tonight. Who knows? Negative latency. Here we go. Let's go, baby. Predictive mouse movement. We should note, however, that this is typically easier to embed SPA components within a large Hypermedia architecture than vice versa. Isolated client components can communicate with broader Hypermedia applications via events in a manner demonstrated on the drag-and-drop sortable JS plus HTMX example. Okay. If your team is not on board, a final reason not to choose Hypermedia isn't technical, but rather sociological. Currently, Hypermedia simply isn't a favor in the web development. Many companies have adopted React as their standard library for building web applications. Many developers and consultants have bet their career on it. Many hiring managers have never heard of Hypermedia, let alone HTMX, but put React on every job post out of habit. It is much easier to hire for. This is just a fantastic reason for what technologies you should choose to get hired. Invert this argument. Are you looking for a job? What should you learn? Learn the thing that has the most applications out there. If you see Go, Java, JavaScript, React, learn those. Be good at them. That way you can get hired somewhere, right? People always forget this, that everyone gives you the secret handshake out loud. Go to LeetCode, learn how to invert a binary tree, handshake, slap those hands, get everything done so you just nail it. Go to your friends, have them ask you questions. When was the last time you struggled at your job? And tell us about it. How did you resolve the issue? You go in there and you give the STAR approach, you give the situation, you walk through everything, and bam, 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 and you get hired because you choose all the right technologies and you practice how to interview. And bam, it's magic. It's crazy how magical it is when you just Look at the very not so secret handshake of getting hired, and it works every time. While this is frustrating, it is a real phenomenon and should be borne in mind with humility. Although Contexte was able to rewrite their application quickly and effectively in HTMX, not all teams are as small, agile, and passionate, nor are all applications such slam dunks for this approach. It may be better to adopt Hypermedia around the edges, perhaps for internal tools first, to prove its value before talking about it broader, or taking a broader look at it. First off, I love this. But then you might hate your React job. Yeah, you might hate your React job, but guess what? You get a React job. Okay? You get a React job such that you can move into a better job. You know how easy it is to talk to a recruiter when they go, why are you trying to go to the back end? And you can be like this, well, I've been doing React now for about a year, and I find that my favorite parts are actually when I'm developing the API or even going further in. I love being able to reach into the back end and work on that side. I do React because right now that is what my job is, and I'm looking for something different. I'm wishing to expand my skill set, and I've been practicing it a whole bunch in my free time. Wow, that sounds really good. It sounds like you're a person who's a real go-getter and knows what you want. Geez, we would like you on our team. Right? Like, it's just like a slam dunk. I love reaching into the back end. Exactly. Who doesn't love reaching in, right? Why speaking so fast? I always speak fast. What are you talking about? Something is better than nothing. Yes. You missed a dab opportunity. I don't dab. Okay, I don't dab. The only kind of dab I'll do is a Bill Gates dab. That's it. I'll only Bill Gates dab. I'll never do any other form of dabbing. This is exactly what's happening to me. Yeah. How do I leave embedded? Do exactly what we just said. What? To give you an example of two famous applications that we think could be implemented cleanly in Hypermedia, consider Twitter and Gmail. This seems like a great Hypermedia place. Like when I think about the application, this seems fantastic. Both web applications are text and image heavy with coarse-grained updates and thus would be quite amenable to a Hypermedia approach. Two famous examples of web applications that would not be amenable to Hypermedia approaches are Google Sheets and Google Maps. Google Sheets can have a large amounts of states within their interdependency between many cells, making it untenable to issue a server request on every cell update. Google Maps, on the other hand, responds rapidly to mouse movements and simply cannot afford a server round trip for every one of them. Both of these applications require a much more sophisticated client setup than what Hypermedia can provide. Of course, the vast majority of web applications are nowhere near the scale and complexity of these examples, and almost every web application, even Google Sheets or Google Maps, has parts where potentially the Hypermedia approach would be better, simpler, faster, cleaner. I agree with all these. Isn't Twitter already struggling with their server round trips? They're struggling in different reasons. The problem is that when you lean super heavily into microservices, there does come a point where you cross a boundary and you now have 400 microservices, and every request requires you talking to like 100 separate microservices. You effectively create your own thundering herd, right? And it's just like that's all that's happening. It's just thundering herd everywhere, right? So that, I mean, there's a real problem with that, and it becomes really hard to understand what's happening. I understand the benefits of microservices. Obviously, I work at Netflix, and I've seen us be able to, work around a lot of these issues, but nonetheless, it's not, there is no good answer. It sounds like bad microservice usage. Well, that's the hard part. How micro should your microservice be? Right? How good or bad should it be? I don't know. How big, how small, how much should you put in one? How monolith should you go? I don't know. It's hard, right? It's hard. Had your share of pain with it too, yeah. Left pad as a service, absolutely. Having Hypermedia as a tool in your tool chest will improve your ability to address engineering problems as a web developer, even if it doesn't become your favorite hammer. There is a good theoretical basis for this approach, practical benefits of many applications, and it is with the grain of many of the web in the way other approaches are not. And then it ends with a nice haiku. What does Grug think? Grug wrote this. This is Grug. You know that, right? Grug is designed by the guy who also designed HTMX. Think about it. Grug probably agrees, is my guess. Yeah, this was good. This was actually really good. I really am I really am excited about learning HTMX enough, because I keep having to build these tools, and then it's just like, hey, can you build a simple UI for it? And I find myself spending way too much time building a UI. And a lot of it is just getting like state and updating and this and that and blah, 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 all correctly. Now that I'm discovering, if you will, HTMX, a lot of it I'm like, oh, I could have done that. Oh, I could have done that. Oh, yeah, that was probably what I wanted to do. Oh, I like this too. That's what I want to do, right? Like, a lot of it is actually pretty straightforward for me. You know, a lot of internal tools, they're very, very simple, right? You just like have a text box that you put a UUID in, and then it gets a bunch of information about it, right? Like, internal tools are very, very one-dimensional. You put in a UUID, you get out a CSV that you can download. You put in this, you get out that, right? Like, they're very, 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 very simple. Oh, no. Something I need to think about. So guess what? The name, I don't have anything clever to say here, so the name is the Prime Engine, okay? Hey, appreciate it. Hey, thank you very much for all those likes and subs. I can't believe it. We made it over 100,000. Did you hear that? Did you hear that? Can you believe it? Can you believe it? We actually, like, if you go to youtube.com, the Prime Time Engine, like, look at this. Look at that. How did this happen? 103,000. How the hell did that happen? Why are you guys watching this? What are you doing with your life? The name is 103,000 again.